I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to cover news and information that the mainstream media really doesn't want you to know about, where we try to recover lost history and explain the inexplicable. Today we're going to talk about history, but we're also going to talk about the future. And the future, I think, is best represented by a young attorney who's joined Judicial Watch. She is our first international fellow. We're very pleased to welcome to the show Kinga Antal. Hello, Kinga.
Hello, Chris. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.
We're very glad, very proud to have you join us on the show. Folks who follow our work know that usually over the summer period, we've had various interns join and assist us. It's part of their training, part of their educational process. This year we did a little something different. We have our first international, and you're really a fellow. You're an attorney in Hungary, and Kinga's helping us with our legal work, doing some of her own research. I think it's important for Judicial Watch supporters or viewers and listeners to know a little bit about you, because you're different. First of all, you're an international fellow, you're an attorney, and you come to us from Hungary, which is a country politically that has some interesting connections with at least the last administration, maybe the next one. And we want to learn more about you and more about Hungary. So that's why I've dragged you in here to the studio, and I will torture you with questions.
Thank you.
Tell our audience, so who are you? Where do you come from? Tell us about like your growing up and where you are in Hungary and your education.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the question. And now, I most of the time the one who asks the questions. That's because right. I'm an interviewer. So in Hungary, we usually say that in these kinds of situations that the hangman is being hanged. So therefore, I'm very excited to be on the other side. Well, thank you very much for the short introduction. I'm coming from Hungary, which gets a lot of attention compared to its size, So we are relatively a small country, but still you can see news about Hungary all the time and about our political leadership,
right.
Often from a very, very negative point of view. So I feel blessed that I have the opportunity now to be here and elaborate on this answer.
And I'll just interrupt a little bit, because Hungary, for those who aren't familiar, not everybody is familiar, is a landlocked country in Central Europe, and you're only about 10 million people.
Yes, we are.
So, that's basically the greater New York metropolitan area, right? So, but for a small country with a relatively small population, you get a lot of attention. You get a lot of coverage in the news media and a lot of political analysis, and I guess that's kind of what you first were touching on.
Yes, and that's how it all comes to the picture, my whole past. So I cannot talk about myself without talking about the history of our country. So my family is stemming from the captivating region of Transylvania.
Now, when Americans hear Transylvania, do you know what they think about?
I know Dracula all the time, but you should really do a visit there.
I know it's a very tired thing to have brought up, but that will be the first reaction. Americans will hear Transylvania and they'll say, Dracula. It's very stereotypical and very narrow-minded. But Transylvania is a regional portion of Hungary.
Yes.
The larger portion is down in Romania. That's another story we can talk about having to do with Hungary's history. But it's in the southern Hungary, is that correct?
Eastern southern, yeah. Right. So it's now part of Romania. After the First World War, this region was attached to Romania with more millions of Hungarians living there. And after that, they were attached to Romania. They weren't given the most basic minority rights in Romania within the Ceausescu dictatorship that they had there. So, for example, and this is the story of my family, my mother had to leave that region just because she couldn't attend university because she was discriminated only based on that she was Hungarian.
Right.
She was offered that, okay, if you would marry a Romanian and you would have a Romanian name, that you could enter university without any problems, because you have very good grades. We have no other reasons to reject you.
A lot of people may not may not understand that that sort of ethnic tension would exist in Europe in living memory, right? In the time that, at least as old as I am, right? That there's people who would be told, well, you can go to university, but you have to marry a Romanian, you have to change your name, you have to give up your identity. And if you don't do that, what happens?
And you know, when I first landed in the US and started talking to people, I was shocked that, you know, of the different things. So that, for example, people here think of communism and socialists as something which happened far away, or you have never experienced it,
right.
really. But my family's history and all of the Hungarians' history, all, you know, we have so many stories about how it happened in real life.
Right.
So we know what we really don't want to come back, and this is where we come to the current political situation.
Yep.
And how our point of view differs from the most Western countries.
A lot of European countries think that whether it's sort of communism light or socialism, but it's essentially the same thing. Just depends on how heavy they have their foot on your neck, right? They think it's cute. They think it's a political experiment. They think, well, maybe they didn't do it right then, but if we did it, we'd do it the right way. We would be successful at. So there's people that flirt with it. They think it's some kind of game. In America, there's many people who think, oh, well, you know, socialism's a great idea. We should go. And they're very naive, because in living memory, again, maybe like your parents or your grandparents, they know.
Let's pay a visit to Hungary, literally, because we have so many memories of it, so many places remembering all these times. We had to fight the Soviets in '56, so and no one was really helping us in that situation.
To be frank, Americans kind of misled the Hungarians about '56. When the uprising took place, there was a lot of sort of whispering to encourage Hungarians to rise up, and then America just left them to be crushed by the Soviets.
Yeah.
A very unpleasant but historically true fact. So it's in living memory. You have parents, grandparents who remember communism, correct?
Of course we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I was born in Szeged, which is in the southern part of Hungary. You might have heard about it during 2015 when the border crisis happened. You know, many illegal migrants approached Hungary from the southern part, and Szeged was in the news all over the world. So I experienced myself how it is living in a city which is, you know, basically invaded by illegal migrants, what it is like being in a city which is not safe, what it is like that I cannot travel by train safely, so that my parents have to take me everywhere by car, you know.
And a lot of American cities are experiencing that now in our own way. What was Hungary's response to that sort of invasion?
Well, we had the vision that we have to protect our borders, and so we have fences over there, and you know, we are first checking who are these migrants, where they come from, and why they would like to cross the border. So I think that this is a very basic thing, that before you let someone enter your borders, you just want to check it, who they are.
Right. That's not an unusual question, is it?
It isn't, but you know, I'm used to it, because just even though I was asked this same question a million times since 2015, I still feel pretty, you know, embarrassed to answer this question, because for me it sounds very basic answer, that once you live in Hungary, you want to protect the people inside first.
Right.
Or is it something very abnormal?
No, it's not. I mean, it's the example that's used by a friend of mine who's in fact, he was the chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, is when you go to bed at night, you lock your front door, right?
Yeah.
You just don't let anybody come into your house or into your apartment. And if somebody wants to come in, you find out who they are. You know, maybe you need a repair done, Are you the repairman? Are you from the company that you said you are from? Do you have identification? Okay, well then come in, right? But unless you know, you just simply don't let people come in whenever they want, however they want, to do whatever they want. You know?
Of course.
It's a very basic, and it's not inhumane. It's not cruel. It's not sinful in any way to just require people to identify themselves.
And it was proved that terrorists have been coming through these borders,
Right.
and there were many terrorist attacks in Europe, all over Europe, not in Hungary, but in many other countries. So it is obvious.
So you mentioned you're in Szeged as a child. What was it like growing up there? What was your childhood like?
Well, it was the perfect childhood anyone can. So all I can wish for. So I wish every children in the whole world the same supportive environment that I have had. I have had always a loving family. My grandparents always supported me, and I was always given the support to study, to try to live for my values. So I never had to choose between whether I want to earn money or whether I want to fight for my values, because my father always told me, like, Kinga, it is your choice. You know that you want to fight for your values. That's why you want to be a lawyer. That's why you would like to sometime maybe even work in politics.
Right.
But whenever you feel that it is enough for you, then you can always quit.
Sure.
We are always here for you, and you're a lawyer. You can have a very simple life back here in Szeged as well. And it means a lot for everyone.
That's a very beautiful thing, right? To have family support like that. It's a great blessing.
It is. So that's why I wanted to move from Szeged, because I was in such a bubble until the age of 17. I skipped the grades, so I entered university at the age of 17. So I was basically a child when I moved to Budapest to study law. And until that time, I was apolitical. Absolutely apolitical. I didn't really care. Of course, I heard about the news on TV, and I was interested in all those stuffs. But right until the time when I, moved to Budapest and experienced what it is like to be taught by I don't know, leftist professors and academics. I didn't have the urge to fight for my values. Of course, it's, as a conservative, you don't always put everything into the window, You don't want everyone to see everything. It's your thing to do.
It's your personal conscience.
Yeah, exactly.
So what university did you go to?
Well, I went to the best one, which is considered to be the best one in Hungary, to the ELTE University in Budapest.
And if I remember correctly, you went there on a scholarship.
Yes, of course I did. I had a state-funded scholarship. Yeah.
So that's a great honor, right? To be selected, you have to earn grades to qualify, but then to be selected to go to university on a scholarship, that's a great thing.
Yes, I had pretty high grades at the time.
So in the university system in Hungary, are you able to make a decision early? Like you said, you were interested in the law, you want to study law. Can you make a decision early to be a lawyer and then take a particular curriculum, as sort of a comprehensive study? Or is there a basic curriculum and then you study law? How do they arrange that?
Yeah, so for most of the cases, we do undergraduate and graduate studies, but for medical studies and for lawyers, it is still the same, that at the age of 18 or whenever you graduate from high school or whenever you would like to enter university, you have to choose directly that I want to be a lawyer. And this is a 5 years long process to graduate from law school. So it is somehow different from what you have here.
In America, there's a similar program for architects, for building design. They do a 5-year program and they do extra practical work besides the 5-year program. And then when they graduate, as a professional architect, they can sign off on building designs and construction. But that in America, it's a little bit different, right? So we do 4 years undergraduate, then 3 years in law school. So it's kind of a different break. But you do a 5-year program dedicated to law. That's
exactly.
Kind of, okay.
Exactly.
And when you were studying law, did your ideas about the law change the more you learned?
Of course, it somehow changes. I would say that when I entered the law university, I didn't really know anything about how it really works. So I was a naive little girl entering the world of everything.
Right.
Because if you study law, you study basically about everything, every single part of life. You have to understand it a little bit more. And every time I learned something new, I was like, oh my God, what? If I wasn't a lawyer, now I would be, afraid to live, afraid of living. I just literally, I wouldn't be able to cross the streets without having a fear of doing something bad or stuff like that.
Get a legal waiver to cross the street.
We say that it gives you a complex view of everything. So if you use it right, then you can do it for the better.
Right. So there's all different types and sort of what I say
Yes.
flavors, different flavors of law, right? So there's contracts law, there's employment law, there's criminal law, there's sort of political law, right? What interest, did you have a particular interest, one that you think is, that you are most interested in out of the different types of law?
Yeah, so during my academic years, I liked civil law the most. I am doing PhD studies as of September this year on the future of the families in civil law, and especially focusing on in vitro fertilization and artificial reproduction technologies, But all the things that catch my attention were somehow about, policy orientated. Which means that I always wanted to somehow understand politics better and somehow make the lives of my environment better. I wanted to understand first how things work in a microclimate, and then after that, after getting the big picture, I want to shape the future of the land where I grew up.
That is very interesting. Very, very interesting. So. Hungary, after 1991, had sort of, it wasn't just a political revolution in the sense that the communists are pushed out, but there's a lot of inner turmoil in the country, right? Because the country has to decide, okay, now what do we do? Who are we? But Hungary's a little different because you have the country itself, the people, are really your own ethnicity. Right? You're Magyar.
Yes.
And it's very distinct. It's very different. Even the language, right? No one speaks Hungarian except Hungarians, right? It's not like any other language. And something that I always found interesting is you even say names from the American era, your names are reversed.
Yes,
right?
of course.
So you would say Farrell Chris.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so, but the whole country does that. So an American shows up and you if you're being nice to Americans, you have to rearrange your names so we understand that your name isn't Antal, it's Kinga, right?
Yeah.
But it's its own language, it's its own ethnicity, it's its own sort of identity. And once you throw off the communists, your country really had to make a decision. Would you just be sort of a softer version of the communists? Or would you go back and kind of reclaim Western civilization, right?
And we made a decision,
the traditions, but there had to be, because it's one way or the other. I'm sure there were a lot of academics that wanted to stay with leftist ideology, but the country made a decision. Explain that a little bit. Explain Hungarian or Magyar identity. What does that mean? That's a tough question.
It is. So it is something like that. We clearly made a decision on that we would like to be part of the Western civilization. And one more thing is which you have to understand if you want to understand how Central Europe works and how Eastern Central Europe works, so my region exactly, the Carpathian Basin, is that we are on the border of everything. So there are clashes of civilizations, to use that term. So you can choose either to be on the Western side, as you told, or just go with the Soviets or go with the other parts. On the one hand, you can make that decision and you can choose your values on what you would like to build. But on the other hand, and what we had to face, and we've been facing it for these 30 years, is that we cannot be independent fully from the eastern part.
Yep.
You know, because there are countries on the eastern part of Hungary as well. And for example, we have Ukraine as a neighbor as well.
Right.
Which is currently in a war with Russia.
Yep.
So we are highly influenced by the war happening there and the inflation that comes from there.
And there are hundreds of thousands of ethnic Hungarians living in Ukraine.
Yeah, there are, and
which is another factor, right? It's another aspect, another view that people don't think. The line that was drawn is not a real borderline, right? It doesn't take into account hundreds of years of. And
just a horrifying fact that Ukraine was one of the most repressive countries against Hungarians, you know. So the Hungarians living in Ukraine did not really have the most basic minority rights there. So, for example, the right to education in Hungarian, in so many senses. So, it is a very complex situation, and you know, even relating to the migration question. So, of course, based on humanitarian reasons, we are all welcoming all the refugees from Ukraine. You know, the men cannot come from there, but if they do, then we also welcome them in Hungary. So we look everyone from Ukraine coming as refugees, but also at the state we cannot look without having those issues, you know, that we really wanted to cooperate with them.
Right.
We really just wanted to have the most basic minority rights, which are considered to be parts of the Western values, and now Ukraine wants to join, or seems to be, you know, wanting to join to the Western world as well.
Right.
But there's a reason why there are still, you know, European countries that don't want to see the Ukraine in within
sure,
the
there's
EU.
a lot of good reasons why. Yep, a lot of good reasons why. But I guess the decision, one thing that Hungarians never backed away from, in my opinion, and I've studied this pretty well, is they never lost their identity as a Christian nation. Even under Soviet, at first occupation, but then Soviet control through the Warsaw Pact, with a very strong communist party, even if it's goulash communism, right? The soft kind of Hungarian version of communism with a smile, kind of, you know. But it was still communist. Mm-hmm. But even though that was being forced onto the country, onto the people, they never abandoned their Christian identity. I think that's a very big part of Hungary's history and identity.
It is, because, you know, we had our very first Christian king, Saint Stephen I, back in 1000 Anno Domini. So it happened more than 1,000 years ago. So it definitely shapes our present as well. We have it in the Constitution that we look at ourselves as a Christian country, and you know, it is just a cultural decision as well, that you would like to have a country based on those values.
Yeah, and it's a profound decision. The fact that you put it in your constitution, I think, it's not just sort of like a political game, or like taking a political position because it's convenient or popular. I think it's a deeply felt part of your identity as a country. I also think that is significant with respect to, at least in my view, the three things that Hungary is currently criticized for.
Okay.
So there's three things. There's
listening.
three
All
things
ears.
that people are very critical of Hungary for. That you won't accept the European Union's pressure on gender ideology. That they have a school curriculum for children. They have social policies.
We don't give the right for men to give birth to babies because it is basically what the EU has, voted on, and we were like, we don't understand the question,
Yeah. So you put something in your constitution also, besides saying that you're a Christian nation.
Yes.
You put something in there about men and women. What was that?
Oh yeah.
I'm kind of leading you with a question.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you. So. Just a few years ago, we added a sentence into our constitution. You mean that one,
yeah.
Right? So it says that the woman is the mother and the man is the father of the baby.
And people in the EU made fun of you for doing that, right?
Yes, they did. And
they said it was ridiculous, and why would you bother to say that?
Yeah, and even me, at the first time I was like, oh, why do we have to contain these kinds of things? And after that I had some discussions from people from Spain, from France, and they were like, oh, no, it's the best preventive measure that you could do. Because now, even though my kid goes to a Christian kindergarten in Spain, they have to face that their kids are being given sex education, which is based on the gender ideology.
Yeah. And it's very aggressive. The gender ideology thing in Europe, and we experience some of it, we see some craziness here in the United States. And there's people that won't accept the conventional historical truth of gender ideology because they reject the biblical foundation for it. But they even reject the science. So whether you're a person of faith or whether you say, oh, no, I just follow the science, they will deny that there's only XX and XY. That's it. Those are the two chromosome pairings, right? You're either a man or a woman. That's just it. And oh, no. There's all these different identities that they... And so Hungary has rejected that. And there's a lot of pressure from the European Union, though, for rejecting that.
There is, but my point of view is that I don't know why so many people care about other people's sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Clearly, this is my point of view. I really don't care what other people do in their bedroom.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
I just...
It shouldn't be an issue, right?
Yes.
And they have protections under the law because they're human beings and they're citizens of the country, not because of what they do or don't do in their bedroom, right?
Yes, and also it is mostly based on that I don't want that education to be given to my child. So it's we Hungarians look at every single question like that. If you can solve a problem on a micro level, you should do that. So, for example, the parents are the best ones to give the sexual education to their children. They have to decide on what kind of education they would like to give to their child, so that it shouldn't be coming from NGOs or anyone without the parents' permission.
Right, because that's the fundamental building block of society is the family unit, right? Mom,
at least
dad,
we look at
kids.
it as that way.
And that the parents have the right to educate their children. In fact, it's not just a right, they have the duty, really. They have the obligation to educate their kids. So we've touched on immigration and the idea that Hungary actually wants to have borders and they want to know who's coming in and who's going out of the country.
What an evil goal.
Yeah, very novel. And that parents are in charge of their kids and their education and the whole gender ideology, sexualization of kids. And then the third point is that your Prime Minister, Mr. Orban, from the very, very start of the Russian-Ukraine war, he wanted a ceasefire and peace negotiations. He said the faster we get this over with, the better. And that has been strongly rejected by other NATO members. I should mention, Hungary's a member of NATO. And you've deployed soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq and other overseas to support other NATO operations. But that also is not a very popular position. Can you give me your impressions, your ideas about that?
Yes, so right from the first moment, Hungary asked for the ceasefire. We want ceasefire because it was never in our interest in history, never ever was in our interest to enter a war. We didn't even want to enter the First World War. And after that, as being on the bad side, once we were just, we just had to be in the war. We didn't want to be. And after that, 2/3 of Hungary's territories were attached to neighboring countries.
I'll give just our viewers a fast tutorial. So obviously Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of the principal combatants in the First World War, and allied with Germany. But once the First World War ends, Hungary's on the losing end of that story because the Austro-Hungarian Empire surrenders and the emperor abdicates and the whole empire comes apart. In the process of doing that, there's a peace negotiation. Everyone knows the Treaty of Versailles, at least in the West. Even Americans know the Treaty of Versailles. They don't know about the Treaty of Trianon. And Trianon was like a follow-on treaty in 1920 after Versailles. And Hungary lost 2/3 of its land area. So you shrank down substantially. And you lost many million people, what, 3-4 million
Yes.
people at least? So the country radically changed. Big shift. And so
Resources were attached to the neighboring countries, basically.
Yeah. So that's. I mean, I only do that sort of aside or that tangent because that gives the historical perspective of why Hungary is not too excited about being pulled into a war, because you're usually on the losing end and you suffer for it. You lose people, you lose territory. It's very difficult on the country. So with that as the context, Hungary says, this is not a good idea. We don't need a war in Ukraine.
Yes, and also, it's somehow against our point of view. So everyone who has ever experienced what it is like to be in a war, like losing your kids, like that there are crying mothers behind every soldier that is fallen. And having all this historical background, there is no question that you would not like to enter the war. We are having so many problems only because of having this war next to us. The inflation is in the skies currently in Hungary,
right.
And we cannot do really anything about it. And we have so many pressures coming from all the sides. We are also part of the EU since 2004. And they would like to put sanctions on the Russians, but without helping us in becoming independent from them, which is, it's nearly impossible to be independent from, as I told you.
Yeah, I'll give an example to our audience. So after the Second World War, the Russians come in, they take over your country, they turn you into a puppet state or satellite of the Soviet Union. So the Soviets end up building all of your infrastructure, the electrical lines, the gas pipelines, oil pipelines. They build your nuclear plants. It's all Soviet-era infrastructure. They built it. And 91 comes along, and you get rid of the Soviets, and you become yourselves. But the system, the infrastructure that the country's, it's all Soviet designed and built.
It is, and we still shouldn't forget that it happened in 89, 90. So we have only 34 years since then. So it's not that big of a time, that you could change everything in your country.
Right.
For politics and for economic growth, it's not that much of time.
Right. So that has an influence. So when they say energy sanctions on Russia, what that really means to Hungary is you would suffer. The Russians will laugh at it. They don't care. They'll find someone else. They'll find the Chinese to buy their oil, gas, etc. But Hungary would have been harmed very badly if those sanctions had been inflicted on Hungary. So you had an exception. You got away from the requirement. So those are three big issues that come up: immigration, the gender ideology, and the war. And then it's all kind of...
And just adding one more point.
Sure.
So they all put these kinds of sanctions on, just specific products. So for example, for a long time, there were no sanctions on the Russian diamonds. So when I was in Brussels, I could find so beautiful diamonds in Antwerp.
Yeah.
Just because there was no sanction
on that. It's a diamond capital,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, they still let it out. Viktor Orban is your prime minister, and he has been now, I guess, for 4 election cycles. In 2022 was the last general election. Judicial Watch actually sent an election observation mission, because all the leftist groups, all the Soros people and sort of the EU leftists, the professional political class, they all wanted to observe the election. And we said, well, we can observe. We're a conservative group. Why can't we? And so we sent election monitors there, and we certified that the election was accurate and fair and legitimate.
And everyone confessed it at the end, so
yeah,
even the liberal ones.
It was uncontroversial. But let me ask you this. Mr. Orban is increasingly painted as some sort of a monster, that he is an authoritarian dictator. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, I don't know, but we have voted for him for 5 times with a very big majority, so I don't know whether it answers your question properly. But, such a country coming from a very, very hard times needs a very strong leader, which is, it's obvious. And without any question, he is a strong leader with lots of political, experience.
Yeah.
More decades, and he's not that old. He's not that old at all. He has been in politics since the age of 20. So he's a very experienced one. But on the other hand, internal politics is usually not so interesting. But let me explain the other parties what
Sure.
Hungary has to offer for you.
What's the opposition?
So if you would like to vote for someone else. So, for example, in 2000, when after the so there was leaked tape recording.
Yes.
In which the former prime minister, the socialist prime minister, said to his party members that we have lied all day long, basically. So exactly what he was saying is that we lied morning, night, and evening. This is what he said.
Yeah.
And moreover, he added that there is no single measure. You cannot quote any significant government measure we can be proud of. So you had this kind of a socialist prime minister. And so simply in that speech, he confessed that they lied about statistics just to win the next election.
Right.
Can you imagine having, such a bad economical situation that we were at the time in a worse position than Greece was, And after that, we had Mr. Orban coming as president back, and we were, just relieved that we don't have this Mr. Gyurcsány as president anymore. And within a decade, his wife appeared like a strong, independent woman. She obviously has nothing to do with his husband, And she is now about to be the messiah of the leftists in Hungary. And obviously no one wants her. Who would like to vote for her? She has, of course, support, and they used to have a big support, but still, I can imagine no situation in Hungary's life that we would ever give her the majority, because, trust is something very vulnerable thing.
Yeah, it's a bad record she's running on. She has a very bad history.
And we always have these kinds of new messiah on the left side, and they are usually very crazy people and psychopaths. So, for example, the current one that we are having on plot is the ex-husband of our former justice minister.
Yep.
He became popular the way, so he simply wanted to enter politics. And what is the best way to enter politics? I mean, as a husband, obviously, you make an audio recording of your justice minister wife just to reveal it after a year or so and say that, oh, what an owl she is, and I am the new messiah of Hungary. This man was, sitting in high positions in the Fidesz, in the governing party for decades, and after that he comes out to be the messiah of Hungary, because it is such a...
From an American perspective, watching what he did, it's like a bad, what we would call a soap opera, right?
Yeah.
Like a telenovela, kind of a television drama series. And actually who I feel bad for is his ex-wife.
It is.
Who I've met and I've interviewed. I feel bad for her because he took a bad situation and then just tried to exploit it for his own personal benefit. It was very bitter. It was a very strange thing to watch. From the outside, as an American looking in, and I know some of these people, very, very peculiar.
And it is, as a young woman like I am, it is very hard to find examples in politics who you would like to follow, who you can look at an example that I would like to be like her one day. And Miss Judith Varga was clearly a woman who I could look up to.
Yeah.
I met her several times. She could never recognize me because I always was somehow else. So, for example, for the first time I was given a prize. The second time I was leading an NGO, and we had some other discussions. But she was so consequent all the time. She told the same things all the time. She always had the same point of view of everything. You could see that she follows her values. And anyway, she has 3 beautiful kids. Her, life is perfect. And it turns out that her ex-husband is a psychopath.
Yeah.
And, how would you ever be able to trust a man who recorded his wife?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just so ridiculous. And he got more than 30% of the votes in Hungary for the European parliamentary elections. But now his new girlfriend also was on TV because, he broke up with his next girlfriend, following girlfriend, and she told the same. So I don't know whether there are enough examples that he is actually a psychopath. But
Hungary's not alone in having very strange politicians who do very strange things. We have our own share. No one has a monopoly on that. I want to talk to you about your professional work. I want to kind of shift to a little bit. But before we get to that, all the stuff we have been discussing, I'm going to make a shameless promotion of my wife's book, which is called Last Warning to the West. And Last Warning to the West is a discussion of Hungary's triumph over communism and the current woke agenda. So, Shay Bradley Farrell is my wife, and she's a PhD who's written this book. I think it's a very good sort of, it will give Americans a good understanding of Hungary's history, and then the post-war, post-Cold War politics, and sort of the rise of Prime Minister Orban and Fidesz. I think it's very worthwhile. So there's my shameless self-promotion of my wife's book. So now I think people have a better feeling or taste of Hungary and kind of your view, your growth, really, to the point where you are now professionally. And so you completed your law program. You're a brand new attorney, and you've come to visit us here. We're very pleased to have you. It was like I said, you're our first international fellow. Tell me about sort of like what your ideas or your hopes were, and now that you've been here, you're a little more than halfway through your time visiting with us, what your impressions are what's been good, and be honest, be frank. What's been good, what's been bad, what's been a wonderful thing, and what's been, oh no, how could this happen? Because I think our viewers and our listeners would like to get the impression of a young professional woman who comes to America, and here's what she experiences. So what do you think? What are some of your ideas?
Yeah. So let me start from a bit other point of view. So as someone who grew up in Hungary, and as I mentioned I was quite apolitical for some time, but of course, as someone growing up there, you also listen to the news and have some impressions of what is happening here in the US. My very first memory is obviously the news that are remembering 9/11. I was in my mother's womb when that happened, but when I was 2 or 3 years old, I could see the news on TV remembering this. After that, the second one was obviously the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy filing,
right.
And how it influenced even Hungarian families, the financial crisis. And the third one is, interestingly, the Benghazi terrorist attack.
Yeah, very interesting.
Because it was on TV all the time, and at the time I didn't really understand what happened there, and I heard that there are some mysterious investigations around it, some people trying to find out what it really was. There's Clinton in it, and we're about to have the next presidential elections, and soon after that, in 2016, Trump won. And within 8 years, I find myself working here in DC at Judicial Watch, and it turns out that you were the ones who investigated that case. So somehow
right.
it is such, you sometimes have the feeling that God leads your path, and therefore I feel pretty blessed that now so that I had this personal connection to Judicial Watch, but also as a lawyer, it is something else when you can have a look at the filing procedure, how you file FOIAs, how do you have to ask the questions so that the agencies will answer them. What do you do when there is a raped FOIA? You have to do something with it. You have to file a lawsuit. You have to go further, ask even more questions. So this whole investigation procedure that you do here, and how you try to fight for transparency with legal tools is quite amazing. And you have several lawyers here, several advocates, and they are all very open towards me, and they tell me about all these stories that you have had so far. And it is very inspirational that you clearly fight for transparency, and it doesn't matter who is sitting in that chair, you just really want to know the truth.
Right. The shorthand version of that is I always say, people lie and records don't. Right? So when we get records and documents, we ask the same questions, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, we ask questions. And a lot of politicians will try to get away from things and not own them, not take responsibility. But that's why records and documents are so important. Because even if we disagree, we say, you say black and I say blue, or whatever. When we put the record down, what does that say? And then you get to read the record, right?
Yeah, and what is more interesting? What could be more interesting than, as a Hungarian, reading FBI documents,
sure.
Things like that. So it is very inspirational, clearly, that I have the opportunity to be here. I learn each and every day something pretty new.
Good. That makes me feel better. I'm glad that we provide an educational format or forum for you to do. You still have a few weeks left. Do you have some things that you hope to learn about or get into, or other activities or things that you want to do or see in the next few weeks?
Yeah, sure. So the deadline is coming up, so I have to finish the study that I was preparing. I would like to make a study which can be, read by everyone, and which will summarize what you do and how you do work with FOIAs here in the U.S., and specifically how your work helped has helped the transparency for the presidential elections, and how you can fight with legal tools to make the elections and the campaigns more transparent. And hopefully I will finish it soon. I still have to do my interviews with you, so I will be back in my original position, and
you get to ask the questions.
It will be me who will be asking the embarrassing questions. So I'm pretty much looking forward to it. Moreover, I'm planning to go pay a visit back to New York once again. It's another thing. But yeah, I'm surely looking forward to go back to Hungary.
So when you first came here, I told you, we met with my colleague, Chris Nelson, who I've worked with for decades, literally. And I said that part of the experience, besides learning about procedure, learning about legal process, was that you should actually run around and have fun, right? That's part of the whole experience. It's not just a one-dimensional legal study. You need to see America, meet people, just take it all in, right? Because that's part of the educational process. It's not just sitting in an office typing on a laptop. So in the broader sort of experience, in the broader liberal education of your visits to places and your meeting people, give me some high points, some more interesting things, and then be frank. What are some things that you found kind of shocking or disturbing?
All the people around me are very inspirational. So, for example, if I am talking in the lunch break to my colleagues, they all have their interesting stories. And it's not just an exchange program where there are many trainees together so that we hang out all the times. I'm with the colleagues that are actually living here, grew up here,
right,
and stuff like that. And so, for example, it is very inspirational to be sitting in an office, and in the next office there is actually another lawyer,
right,
and she has 6 kids back at home, but she is still so motivated to work here as a lawyer.
Right.
And all the girls who has helped me to come over that cultural shock that first touched me, because obviously when my plane landed in the US, I was simply shocked. So
it's a little overwhelming, right?
Yes, it is. And for example, the biggest difference on the streets is what I can see is that the drug issue is literally on the streets, or compared to Hungary. And there are many people hallucinating on the streets, and you don't really know whether they want to come to you, or they are just thinking about someone else in their minds. And
they're often, sadly, so there's a drug issue, but there's also a great public mental health issue. There are people that are psychotic who are just walking around the streets. They really should be in some sort of an institution, having some treatment, but for some perverse reason, as a country, we've decided to take people with major drug and alcohol issues and also major emotional issues. They're emotionally disturbed. They are literally in the middle of a psychosis, a psychotic event, and we release them into the street and we just let them go. It's a crisis that we have not addressed. No one wants to talk about it, but it's quite shocking for you to come here and see it, right?
Another thing is basically what I experienced during conferences, how much of a business is the business card business, So it's like you keep switching your business cards. But there are some times that you can realize that the people are not really looking at you. They are just looking over your head because they want to approach another person over there. And, it is quite embarrassing whether they really want to talk to you for these 10 seconds, because these talks mostly, last 10 seconds.
It's very superficial.
It's superficial, but, I'm a little bit used to it, because I worked even in the European Parliament last year as a trainee, and, there is this bubble, and there I somehow got used to it, but in DC everything is even faster. So I was like doing this and was so shocked.
Another culture shock moment. Yeah. Washington is unique for that. There's an awful lot of people who don't really have very sincere interactions it's all just sort of mechanical, right? And
and everyone is so unrealistically kind, because, and I suppose that it is because everyone thinks that the person sitting next to me might be someone, so I shouldn't mess with them. So sometimes I had these feelings, but on the other hand, there are also those people that really do care of each other, and they are really willing to help you. So it is a very, very mixed experience, and it clearly shaped my point of view about the U.S. and even as you mentioned, just walking on the street, being on the metro, traveling to other places. And I have many notes on that, so maybe one day I will.
That'll be an article.
I will go to the psychologist and just reveal all my secrets to her, what I experienced during these times. But it's a very, very special situation in what I am currently, because I left my country when I had very good times back at home. So I had emotional security, physical security, and many friends around me.
Sure.
And when I had to come here, I was like, as if the Maslow pyramid was, upside down, coming for my individualistic needs, and I don't have the others that I had back at home.
Right. Even that is sort of an educational process. It's a growth process, right? It is. Because it forces you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, in your home environment, and all of a sudden you're pushed out into a very alien environment. But Judicial Watch is friendly, so
so with a Judicial Watch, I would have never been able to come here and work in such a supportive environment. So. And obviously, I'm mostly still in the office during working days, and this is some kind of a very unique experience that I'm very grateful for, without any exaggeration.
Good, that's very good to hear.
Thank you very much for everything.
We as an organization, we realize that if we just talk among ourselves, it's an echo chamber. It's pointless, right? And so we have an obligation to get out beyond ourselves, get out of our comfort zone, but also to make an investment in the future, right? So we kind of touched on this briefly, talking about sort of the living memories of communism, right? So you have parents and grandparents who it's very real to them. It's not some abstract. They know at 2 o'clock in the morning, a knock on the door, they know the people that are doing that.
My great-grandfather had to hide in his own house for 15 years because he was, sentenced death penalty with false accusation without being given the right to fair trial.
Yeah, there's a great. He's actually, his training is as a concert pianist. He's a professor of music, a Hungarian by the name of Bálint Vázsonyi. And he died probably 20 years ago, but he wrote a great book called America's 30 Years War. And it's actually a book based on the discussion you and I have been having. I highly recommend the book to people. And he said, look, when I was a little kid, the Nazis showed up, and they wore black leather trench coats, and they banged at the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then the Soviets showed up, and the AVO, which is the Hungarian secret police, and they wore black leather coats, and they knocked on their door at 2 o'clock. They were like opposite sides of the same coin, right? Whether it's National Socialism or Communist Socialism, it's the same. There's very little difference. And it was the same as a young child who was experiencing that. I mean, it made him flee Hungary. But that's an experience that educates and informs an entire generation. Well, you're a completely new generation. You have no experience with that. You hear stories, but you've never been subjected to it. And so that's why it's very important for Judicial Watch, not just in the case of you as a young professional Hungarian, but even Americans. They need to be able to have at least a historical memory and awareness, a sensitivity to what it could be like, or what it was, and what a threat it is now. We've just experienced with the craziness of COVID a form of totalitarianism. The Chinese, it would be their dream to lock down an entire population, force people to take a vaccine. this is craziness. This is nothing like America's experience. And so we have to educate and inform people. And so you as a Hungarian, bringing your history of coming out from under the Soviet Union, and Hungary today reminds me of America in the 1980s, right? It's optimistic, it's cheerful, it's energetic. People want to have a family and make some money and lead their lives. It's all the best of sort of Reagan America is what Hungary is experiencing right now. I don't want America to ever lose that. There's people in the current government who are authoritarian, in my view, and they're trying to kill that. But it's important that we share these things because that's the best of America. It's the best of what Hungary is experiencing. So that's why we take the time. That's why we spend the effort, time, money, et cetera, to have someone like you here, because it's a mutual exchange, right? And you take these experiences, and hopefully you go home to Hungary and say, hey, look, the Americans do it this way, or the Americans made this mistake, or there's something to be learned from it. So that's a very long explanation for why we do this fellowship. But it is very important. It's important to our organization. It's important to Americans who support us, frankly, that they know that we're trying to share our experience with you. And because you're the future, you know, I'll be in the ground a long time, and you will still be doing what you do professionally, or even just with your family, right? So that's your inheritance, right? This is an inheritance that we're giving you. It's very important. So that's kind of a heavy thing to say, but I mean it. And
you're absolutely right. So discussion is clearly needed between Americans and Hungarians. And of course, we've discussed and touched so many topics within an hour, but they are way much more complex in themselves. And it was really a valuable experience for me, and I would be so happy if I could work in the future on building these networks a bit better and helping other people to have these kinds of experience more.
These networks are important. Talk about, I mean, you have sort of an idea, you have a feeling, or at least kind of a notion for sort of cooperative, collaborative networks. How do you see that? How would you see that developing?
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I mean, like, you know that it's important that there be a connection, that there be cooperation with Judicial Watch, and we have you come over and join us. And then Judicial Watch sent some people over to Hungary, and they went to some conferences and they talked to people. What's the value of all that?
The value of all that is that we all have our own experiences, and switching them and just telling each other and discussing all these matters can clearly help us in getting better. So, for example, if you have debates with other people from your country, you can also get better, because by using your arguments, you always get better. But another way of trying to be even better is using other countries' experience, because, you know, I also heard many Americans that it is so cute how Hungary, you know, nowadays deals with the gender ideology, because it is like America was in 2010 and 15, that we are having those kinds of soft issues right now, and not those ones that are actually here in America. Right. So, for example, for me, it would be very important to somehow let the Hungarians know what is actually happening in America, and using all those organizations that are here in America to articulate these kinds of point of views and show the dangers of these leftist ideologies, and also showing the good example of some Hungarian measures, you know, supporting families, how we can try to convince young couples to get married and have children, how we can, you know, support the people who are under 25 by giving them tax exemption, invoice tax exemption, exemption, which means 15% in Hungary. Right. So
it's a fascinating. So I mean, I guess what we're both trying to communicate, each in our own way, is that there are ideals and goals and values that we share. We're on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. You're a young lady. I'm an old guy. I'm like 40 years older than you. But it doesn't matter, guy, girl, young, old, Hungarian, American. There are shared values and freedoms and liberties and issues that we share in common and that we have got to keep alive. And we have to encourage each other, right? Americans need to encourage Hungarians. Hungarians need to encourage Americans. Otherwise, the bad guys, they are happy to kill it. They're more than pleased to suppress those liberties, to suppress those ideas and those freedoms, because they want power. What drives them is power. Power is number one. And they'll do anything to consolidate that power. And so the more we talk about those liberties, those freedoms, those individual rights, God-given rights, and we keep encouraging each other, Hungarian organizations, American organizations, you're not alone, right? You don't feel isolated, because what the left wants to do is wants to isolate you. It wants to make you feel like you're alone, you're a loser, you're stupid, what you're saying is old-fashioned, nobody believes that. And when you stand up and say, no, that isn't true, sometimes people are shocked. They're like, oh, you agree with me?
This is what I actually experienced in America. So, for the first time I was, hiding that I'm from Hungary. Most of the people, thought that I'm from Germany based on my appearance or somehow. But after that, when I told them that I'm Hungarian, most of the people were not against me, and even if they had some kind of criticism against Hungary, and I, had the time to just make it clear why does the exact things happen, why and how we support Mr. Orban's politics back in Hungary, and why it is not, anti-humanitarian and stuff like that. Because clearly, if you have any questions about Hungarian hospitality and how we deal with people, just pay a visit to Hungary. Clearly, or go to Transylvania. Everyone is so welcoming, and we really love to have people from other places of the world, and we love so much those people that are actually interested in what we do, and not just making false accusations from being far away. And the other thing is that we share so many values, but on the other hand we have some barriers. We are so far away from each other.
Right.
So building a network based on that with more organizations, being it institutionalized, would be so so important, so that this language barrier, this being so far away barrier would not exist anymore.
Before we end, I just want to pause and be very deliberate about this. Is there anything that I have asked or that I've forgotten to ask? Anything that you want to say that I should have asked you or I forgot about, or that you just want to I'm going to give you the last word on our interview here and your experience?
Well, I think we have touched on most of the points that are clearly the most important ones in Hungary. And one sentence is most of the time not enough to summarize everything. But still, just adding one more comment. If you are interested in why, for Hungarians, it is very important, the Treaty of Trianon that you mentioned, when we lost 2/3 of Hungary's territories. There are so many great speeches recorded of County Albert Apponyi, Apponnyi, and he gave his reflections on the Treaty of Trianon and why it was, so against every clear, so it was nonsense, and why we feel it so, nowadays we feel still so important to be talked about. You should give it a try, and also and read them. But also the most important part is that you should talk to Hungarians. You should try to reach out to people coming from Hungary. You should try to get personal experience for what you do, and You know, I also could have had any kind of prejudices of America when I came here. And most of the people told me back in Hungary as well that, oh, you should take care of yourself. There are so many dangers, and clearly there are. But, you know, you have to be open for some time to have your own first experiences so that you can understand what the other culture really has to offer for you, and you will be able to understand it better. So if you ever feel like that you would like to get to know more about Hungary, just come and visit us. And I'm sure that anyone on the street would like to talk to you about our past, about our point of view, and we would like to welcome you next time.
Very good. Kinga Antal, thank you so much for joining us here at Judicial Watch for your fellowship. And I think folks learned a lot about Hungary. I think they learned a lot about you and what your professional goals and aspirations are. And we thank you for taking time with us today.
Thank you very much for you, and thank you very much for everyone who has helped me in making my experience and time in DC better. Thank you.
I'm Chris Farrell, on Watch.